of Ukraine's children have been taken to occupied Crimea and Russia. Ukraine says 8,000 to 11,000, but reports out of Russia this week suggest it could be tens of thousands. Among them, Dennis, the 16-year-old who spoke on behalf of the little ones all those months ago. Vladimir says these are our children. They lived with us. They became attached to us, and we became attached to them. We lived here as one family. These orphans had no one else. The orphanage will reopen once Kherson has basic services restored. And Sahidok says he expects to have even more children than he did before the war there because so many parents have been killed. Chance?
So many Dennises out there tonight. Jason Bellini tonight from Ukraine. Thank you. I want to bring Marcum Davis into the conversation tonight because he operates and helps support orphanages taking care of about 2,200 children in Ukraine through the organization Abundance International. Marcum, you know exactly what's happening there because you've been working with them throughout. Do you know what's being done to help the children who have been taken to actually bring them home?
The stories in Kherson have been particularly challenging, as you can imagine, because once the Russians took over the territory, the assistance that they would have gotten from the Ukrainian government was just not possible. So we ended up becoming the sole provider for 5 different orphanages in the region. And the main baby house, we call it, in the city of Kherson was from the infants to 4-year-olds. And we actually were approached when the Russians took over. They wanted to bring their own staff in, and they literally told our people to leave. And so these kids that we'd cared for, about 150 of this particular location, we just didn't know what was going to happen to them. We are now working our way, negotiating to reassume the control and management of that through the doctor who's been in charge of that. In these areas, we did have to literally take and create a foster system and get the kids into local families, but we've been able to keep track of them, keep those handled. None of them have gone into Russian capturing, although we were really keenly aware of that and afraid of that. We had to use systems within that. People who are authorized to drive, could do one thing. It was just a very complicated system, but we did it. We got fishermen, we got farmers, all these people to coordinate, to create our own food chain within the area. I can only speculate what you're asking about kids taken into Russia. We know that there were some done, not from our orphanages. I'm just going to be very candid. The likelihood of those kids returning is fairly bleak. This is not like in the case of World War II where Polish children were taken to Germany and then after the war they returned. Well, why were they returned? Because Germany was conquered. Russia's not going to be conquered.
I just have to say, the picture of the babies on the blanket on the floor doing tummy time, I think anyone who's a parent, you think of your kids doing tummy time. And my understanding is that many of these children, they don't necessarily have parents who have died. Maybe the parents couldn't care for them, provide for them. Is that what you've seen? These kids very much have families, and even if it's not a mom or dad, families who care about them.
You have really good information, and thank you for clarifying that. It's a misunderstanding, and I'm asked this quite often. It's like, are the orphanages filling up with kids because the parents have passed away? That's not the case. If those who've been in Ukraine understand it's a very family-centric culture where perhaps in one city 4 generations still live. And so if perchance both parents, one parent is at war, the other one died in an apartment or something like that, there's family, local family in the city most of the time that will take those children. The children that are in orphanages, because the country of Ukraine has not adopted a real foster care system. So all children are really dropped off for one of 3 reasons. Either it's a disabled child, somebody doesn't want to raise a Down syndrome or handicapped child, or the parents are incapable, they're in prison, there are drug issues, or it's a teen pregnancy that the mother doesn't want to try to raise the child. As the war moved in the east and from the south, the smart orphanages were saying, let's get our kids out of harm's way. So for instance, we were in Venetia visiting there, and within 2 weeks they went from 110 kids to 170 kids because the orphanages were saying, can you help house us? We can't stay where we are, and they have no choice. So we're quickly helping ramp up everything to almost 2x the entire operation in short notice.
Thinking of the children who, God willing, are one day reunited with their families and their country, Are we thinking ahead? Because we did see after World War II, a lot of these children who had been displaced from their family, then their country, and then ripped away again to say, okay, now you're back in your home country. And it was really traumatic. Are we thinking about that differently to make sure these kids are really taken care of?
The psychological needs of these kids is going to be tremendous, I'm sorry, because of the trauma that they have experienced. And starting from having those who are in country having to live through the war, every day in every city we traveled to in the whole country, in every orphanage we visited, every city had air raid sirens go off at some point during the day. When the air raid sirens go off, everybody goes in panic mode. Nurses grab kids, rush for the bomb shelter, rush for the basement. The disruption to lives is tremendous, and especially when you're talking about these 0 to 4-year-olds, these tiny babies. You can't explain to them what these noises are. You can't explain to them why the adults in their lives are getting freaked out. As far as children who have been displaced to Russia, if they're able to reunite with family, depends on their age, how long they spend there, and what circumstances they're brought back, what their lifestyle condition is like. But certainly it's not normal, and certainly the psychological needs of these children are going to have to be met. I want you to get a picture of what life was like before the war. You know, please, if anybody should have a chance to go to AbundanceInternational.org, look at the photos. So many of these, you can see when they were before the war, how warm it was. We used to be able to hold the kids and play with them. And just to see the nurturing environment that these kids had, and the contrast to what it is today already is a traumatic situation for these kids to live with. And we look forward to that day where we can just go there for a pleasant trip when we make deliveries or doing a project. We can just play with them again. And as much as possible, one other thing I want to mention, kids every day, we set up schedules. So they have certain times they nap, certain times they have food, certain times they do schooling. And the older kids are all in school. We're trying to make normal life to them. We've been able to provide a lot of school materials, and they're trying to create as much normalcy as possible in the middle of all this chaos. Because at the end of the day, we need them to come out not just alive, but with prospects for as best a future as they can have.
Exactly, exactly. They deserve happiness just like anybody else, of course. Marcum Davis with Abundance International, thank you. And I really, really mean that. Thank you for the work you're doing.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate you letting us share the stories. I really do.
Coming up, a record number of Americans are missing work right now.